Well, welcome to Coxnotes. As most of you known who or know by now, most of you that have looked at some of my previous stuff, you know that my plan here with Coxnotes is to diversify a little bit. In my first few segments, I want to talk about some firearms that are either part of my collection or have been loaned to me for purposes of doing the Coxnotes segments. And my primary purpose in this is to introduce the viewers to some of the older guns and some really good training guns, some firearms that are good to start young people out on. I've participated in the Colorado Hunter Education Program for over 40 years, and it became very important for me to get out and get youth involved in the shooting sports and get them involved in hunting, and not just for the sake of killing, but for the sake of teaching fair chase and teaching responsibility and teaching safety with firearms. And I think that's very important, especially in the light of today's world, where a lot of things are really given negative. Today, I want to talk about a gun that I acquired quite some time ago, but I want to give you a little history of it first. Way back, and I'm talking way back, a friend of mine always refers to it as the middle of the last century, so in a way I'll talk about it that way. Ruger came out with their first really usable semi-automatic 22. And some of the other manufacturers kind of hustled up to find something that would answer the Ruger 22. Remington came up with a really unique plan whereby they teamed up with DuPont and they created a special nylon formula that could be used for a gun stock, and it proved to be one of the first really usable synthetic stocks that's on the market. And of course, synthetic stocks are very, very common and very popular now. So let me talk about how this all came about. In 1959, Remington introduced a 22 rifle semi-automatic that was based on with the nylon stock, and it was the Model 66, Remington Nylon 66. Now, when that gun came out, it had a magazine feed that went through the stock of the gun. It was a tube feed magazine, and very successful. In fact, the promotion of the gun, I'm going to read something here for you, because the promotion of the gun resulted in a real interesting world record being set. The first Nylon 66 was introduced in 1959, and they wanted it to compete with the Marlin Model 60 and the Ruger 1022s. And by 1970s, the sales had somewhat tapered off, and largely because of the 1022. The Model 66, the Nylon 66, was used to break a world record in aerial targets, and it was crazy how many targets this guy hit. And so in 1959, Tom Fry, a field representative for Remington, set out to surpass Ad Topperwine's world record, which was set in 1907, of shooting 72,500 2.5-inch wooden blocks as they were tossed into the air, and he missed only 9. Only 9. Fry came up with the model Nylon 66 and maintained an average pace of 1,000 shots per hour for 13 consecutive 8-hour days. When it was all over and done with, he had shot 100,010 blocks, and he'd hit 100,004 of those blocks, missing only 6. The rifles were cleaned only 5 times through that trial. So, as the 66 became fairly popular, Remington decided to carry this out a little bit farther. Their next introduction in that line was the Model 10C, which is the gun I'm going to talk about today. The 10C differed from the Model 66 in that it no longer had the tubular magazine fed through the stock, and instead had a detachable magazine. Now, the original 10C had a 10-shot magazine, and you could always tell that you had the original magazine because it would be marked 10C on the magazine. This particular gun does not have the original magazine. It's got what is probably an aftermarket magazine, and it's only 5-shot. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about that 5-shot configuration after a bit here, but the detachable magazine gave the nylon Remington just a little bit more diversity in that it did have a detachable magazine. I like it better because I like the idea of being able to pull the magazine out and unload the firearm a little bit simpler, and it's relatively simple to eject it and make sure that the firearm's clear and safe, and that's always an important part of this. The other big difference is while the Model 66 was black nylon, the 10C came out in a brown nylon. Kind of had a little bit of an imitation wood grain to it in places. The diamond inlays, white diamond inlays in the forestock marked it. This gun has a very, very usable rear sight system. It's adjustable for both windage and elevation, and it's a very accurate little gun. You'll see a little bit later when we take it out to the range. It's got a good positive safety on it. I like a safety that you can hear and see at the same time. Forward to fire, back to safe, good thumb access to the safety. A nice, safe firearm, and a good firearm to be the first one to introduce somebody to the world of semi-automatic firearms. This has a white dot front sight on it, and like I say, very, very accurate, and we'll see more of that. Remington also came out with another version of this gun that came out with a 5-shot magazine similar to this, and it had a green stock on it. It was largely sold through the Kmart stores. So, 10C marked right on the pistol grip, 10C, and we'll go out and see how this thing shoots after a bit. How's that? Meanwhile, I'll brag a little bit about the weather here in Colorado. Here we are on the 4th of January. It's now approaching the upper 30s here in Montrose, Colorado, and at the same time, everybody out on the East Coast is just getting whammed with bad weather. So I'm sitting out here in the sunshine, and I'm going to head for the range here in a little bit and do a little shooting. So this is Coxnotes. Please download my videos, show other people about them. I know that they're looking pretty amateurish and stuff, and I'm on a learning curve with this, but I'm enjoying this a lot. And the opportunity, like I say, to get people involved with the shooting sports and get more and back to the good basics and stop this garbage about gun control and taking firearms away from people and stuff. There's some good things that can be done. Great bunch of fun to go out planking, especially with 22 rifles. So, Coxnotes, January 4th, 2018. Okay. Okay, I've come out into the some public lands not far from my home, and going to demonstrate a little bit of the gun that I've been talking about. This is a fine little firearm, no longer in manufacture. It's the Mohawk 10C, which is a derivative of the Remington Nylon 66, and that was all addressed earlier in the first segment. This rifle does not have the original magazine, as I mentioned earlier. This is just the 5-shot magazine. It works fairly well. It's an aftermarket magazine, and tends sometimes to not feed like it should, but it's easily remedied usually. So I've got some targets set up down there about 50 feet away. I'm going to take a few shots at that. I like the active targets. Particular one down there has got some steel to it. Because the ground's frozen, I can't push it in the ground, so I've got it leaning up against some bushes back there. So let's see what this little gun will do. 50 foot. I haven't shot it in 2-3 years. So it's got a nice positive safety on it. Mentioned earlier, again, off for safe. And let's take a shot at that biggest gong down there and see what we can do offhand. Feeding problem, as I mentioned. Okay, now we're ready to go. There we go. So again, easy to check, see if it's unloaded. Be sure you've got those youngsters out there training them. Pull the magazine, take a peek-see in there, make sure everything's clear before anybody goes down range. So that's the Mohawk 10C.